The dust settled around Franklin Quincy's boots as he dismounted in front of the Reno courthouse, and what he witnessed through the smudged windows made his blood run cold in a way that 6 years of riding the Nevada territories had never done. Inside that building of supposed justice, a young woman stood surrounded by 3 men in ill-fitting suits, their hands gesturing too close to her body, their voices carrying threats disguised as legal terminology through the thick summer air of 1878. Franklin had ridden into Reno that morning expecting nothing more than to collect his payment for the cattle drive he'd completed from Sacramento. The town was growing fast with the mining operations expanding through the Sierra Nevada foothills, and with growth came opportunities for honest men and predators alike. He'd seen enough of both types to recognize which category these courthouse men fell into the moment their laughter echoed across the wooden planks of the building's porch. The woman's voice rose in protest, and Franklin found himself moving toward the courthouse door before conscious thought caught up with his boots. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with auburn hair pinned back in a style that suggested she'd dressed carefully that morning, expecting to be treated with dignity. Her green dress was modest and well-maintained, despite showing signs of hard wear, the kind of dress a woman wore when she had little but took pride in what she possessed. The desperation in her eyes as she clutched a sheaf of papers to her chest hit Franklin like a physical blow. "The land deed is legal," she was saying, her voice shaking but determined. "My father left it to me in his will. You have no right to claim it for unpaid taxes when I have the receipts showing every payment made in full." The tallest of the 3 men, a politician named Morris Sullivan, who Franklin recognized from wanted posters in other counties, leaned against the desk with manufactured ease. "Now, Miss Grayson, you seem to be under a misunderstanding about how these things work. Your receipts are just pieces of paper. What matters is what's in our official ledgers, and those ledgers show a very different story." "You are lying," she said, and Franklin heard the tears threatening beneath her anger. "I know what my father paid. I was there for the last 3 years of payments myself." Another man, shorter and thick around the middle with a badge that proclaimed him some kind of deputy clerk, moved closer to her. His hand reached for the papers she held. "Why don't you let us take care of those documents?" "Make this easier on yourself, Miss Grayson. A young woman alone has no business trying to run a cattle ranch anyway. Sign the land over to Mr. Sullivan's mining company, and we can make sure you get a fair price. Might even find you work in town, pretty thing like you." The implication in his tone made Franklin's jaw clench hard enough that his teeth ached. He pushed through the courthouse door, letting it bang against the wall with enough force to draw every eye in the room. "I'll handle this matter now," Franklin said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who'd faced down rustlers and survived range wars. His hand rested on the worn grip of his Colt revolver, not threatening but present, a reminder of the kind of justice that existed outside courthouse walls. Morris Sullivan straightened, his expression shifting from predatory confidence to calculated assessment. "This is private business, Cowboy. Move along." "Didn't look private from where I was standing," Franklin replied, moving further into the room. He kept his body angled so he could watch all 3 men while positioning himself between them and the woman. Looked like 3 grown men trying to intimidate a lady into signing away her legal property. The woman, Miss Grayson, stared at him with a mixture of hope and confusion. Up close, Franklin could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the way her shoulders carried tension like a physical weight. She'd been fighting this battle alone for some time. "Who are you?" she asked. "Franklin Quincy, madam." "I've got no claim to your business, but I've got a powerful objection to watching injustice happen in a building that's supposed to represent law and order." The deputy clerk puffed up his chest. "You've got no authority here. This is official county business." Franklin pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, moving slowly and deliberately. "This here is a letter of credit from Judge Harrison Matthews of the Sacramento District Court. I do occasional work for him, making sure the law gets enforced in places where local authorities might be looking the other way. Judge Matthews has been hearing rumors about land fraud in Washoe County for months now. I expect he'd be very interested in examining those official ledgers you mentioned, comparing them to Miss Grayson's receipts." He was bluffing partially. The letter was real enough, but his authority here was questionable at best. What mattered was whether these men believed him, and more importantly, whether they wanted to risk their scheme being exposed if he really did have connections to a district judge. Morris Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "Let me see that letter." "Let me see Miss Grayson's receipts and your ledgers," Franklin countered. "We can all examine the documents together, right here, right now. If everything is legal like you claim, you've got nothing to hide." The three men exchanged glances, a silent conversation happening in the space between them. The third man, who'd been silent until now, spoke in a low voice to Sullivan. "We can't show the ledgers, not with the alterations still visible." Sullivan's face flushed red. "Shut your mouth, you fool." Franklin smiled without humor. "That's what I thought. Miss Grayson, I believe you should take your receipts and leave now. These gentlemen and I are going to have a conversation about what happens next. You cannot just walk in here and threaten us," the deputy clerk sputtered. "I'll have the sheriff arrest you." "The sheriff is my cousin," Miss Grayson said suddenly, her voice stronger now. "Robert Grayson. He's been out tracking horse thieves for the past week, but he'll be back tomorrow. I wonder what he'll say when he hears about how his colleagues have been trying to steal his niece's inheritance." The color drained from the deputy clerk's face. "Your uncle is the sheriff. You said your name was Grayson, but I did not make the connection." "My father was Robert's older brother," she said, standing taller now. "He died 6 months ago from pneumonia, and I've been running the ranch since then. These men showed up 3 weeks ago claiming I owed back taxes, but every receipt I have contradicts their claims." Franklin filed away this information, his mind already working through the implications. If her uncle was the county sheriff, that complicated things. It also explained why these courthouse men had been pushing so hard to close the deal before he returned. "Here's what's going to happen," Franklin said, his voice calm but inflexible as iron. "Miss Grayson is going to walk out of here with all her documents. You three are going to forget this entire scheme. When Sheriff Grayson returns tomorrow, Miss Grayson will explain what happened, and he can decide whether to pursue charges against you for attempted fraud and intimidation." "And if we refuse?" Sullivan asked, but his bravado had weakened. Franklin's expression hardened. "Then I'll send a telegram to Judge Matthews today describing what I witnessed, and he'll send federal marshals to investigate. Federal crimes carry federal sentences, Sullivan. I know you've run similar schemes in Placer County and El Dorado County. How long do you think before a real investigation connects all those fraudulent land transfers back to you?" The silence in the courthouse stretched taut as a rope ready to snap. Finally, Sullivan stepped back, his hands rising slightly in a gesture of surrender. "Fine. Take your receipts, Miss Grayson. There must have been some clerical error in our records. We will review them again." "Make sure you do," Franklin said. "And gentlemen, I'll be staying in Reno for a while, just to make sure no more clerical errors occur." Miss Grayson gathered her papers with shaking hands, and Franklin offered his arm to escort her out. She took it gratefully, her fingers gripping his sleeve as they walked down the courthouse steps into the bright Nevada sunlight. Once they were outside and out of earshot, she released a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it for weeks. "Thank you. I do not even know what would have happened if you had not walked in. They were backing me into a corner, literally and figuratively." "You're welcome, Miss Grayson. Though I have to ask, is your uncle really the sheriff?" A small smile touched her lips, the first genuine expression he'd seen from her. "Yes, Robert Grayson is definitely the county sheriff and he is my uncle. That part was completely true. But he's not out tracking horse thieves." "Oh, he is. That part is also true. He's been gone for 9 days. I just neglected to mention that he's not expected back for another week at least." The thieves led him and his deputies up toward the Oregon border. Franklin laughed, surprised and impressed. "Quick thinking." "I learned from the best," she said, and sadness flickered across her face. "My father taught me that sometimes the truth can be shaped like clay, molded to show different facets depending on what angle you present." They stood on the dusty street, and Franklin became aware that he was still offering his arm and she was still holding it. Neither of them seemed inclined to break the contact. "Miss Grayson, I think we should make that telegram to Judge Matthews real and official. Even if those men back down now, they might try again once I leave town. A federal investigation into land fraud would protect you and any other property owners they've been targeting." She nodded. "That's wise. And please call me Rebecca. After what you just did for me, I think we can dispense with excessive formality." "Rebecca," he repeated, liking the way her name felt in his mouth. "I'm Franklin, though most folks call me Frank." "I prefer Franklin," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "It suits you better." There was something in that moment. Standing in the middle of Reno's Main Street, with the Sierra Nevada mountains visible in the distance, and the afternoon sun turning the dust motes into floating gold, that felt significant in a way Franklin could not quite articulate. He'd helped people before, intervened in injustices, righted wrongs when he could. But the way Rebecca looked at him, with gratitude mixed with something deeper and more complex, stirred something in his chest that had nothing to do with heroism and everything to do with connection. "Let me buy you lunch," he said. "We can discuss what information Judge Matthews will need for his investigation, and you can tell me more about your ranch. If Sullivan's mining company was trying to take your land, there must be something valuable on the property." Rebecca hesitated, and Franklin saw her weighing propriety against practical concerns. Then her shoulders straightened with decision. "Lunch sounds perfect, but I should buy yours, considering you just saved my inheritance. How about we call it even and split the cost? Deal?" They walked together to a restaurant Franklin had noticed earlier. A clean establishment run by a Chinese family that had earned a reputation for excellent food, despite the prejudice they faced in a town that was not always welcoming to immigrants. Rebecca entered without hesitation, greeting the owner's wife by name, and Franklin revised his estimation of her character upward another notch. Over plates of beef stew and fresh bread, Rebecca told him her story. Her father, Thomas Grayson, had bought the ranch 15 years earlier when Rebecca was just a child. Her mother had died during the journey west from Missouri, leaving Thomas to raise Rebecca alone. He'd been a fair man and a good rancher, building up a decent herd and maintaining the land through droughts and hard winters. "When he got sick last winter, I took over most of the ranch operations," Rebecca explained, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "The ranch hands respected me because I'd been working alongside them since I was old enough to sit a horse. Father taught me everything, books and ranching both. He used to say that ignorance was the only real poverty." "He sounds like a wise man." "He was." Her voice caught slightly. "The pneumonia took him fast. 1 week he was coughing, the next week he was gone. I inherited everything according to his will, filed properly with the county. The ranch, the cattle, the equipment, all legal and documented. When did Sullivan show up? 3 weeks ago, like I said. He came with forged tax records claiming my father had not paid county property taxes for the past 3 years. But I have every receipt, every payment documented in my father's ledger books. Someone altered the county records to make it look like we were delinquent. Franklin leaned back in his chair, thinking through the implications. Mining operations need land and water. Your ranch must be positioned on or near something valuable. There's a creek that runs through the northern section of the property, Rebecca confirmed. Good water, year-round flow from snowmelt. And last year, one of my ranch hands found gold traces in that creek. Not enough to mine profitably on a small scale, but if a mining company brought in hydraulic equipment and crews, they could probably pull out a decent amount of gold. Did your father file a mining claim? No. He was not interested in tearing up the land. He liked ranching, preferred the steady income from cattle over the gamble of mining, but word must have gotten out about the gold traces somehow. Franklin nodded slowly. Sullivan has been running land fraud schemes across multiple counties. He finds property owners who are vulnerable, elderly or isolated or recently bereaved, and uses forged documents to pressure them into selling for pennies on the dollar. Then his mining company moves in and extracts whatever resources the land holds. How do you know all this? I've been tracking him for Judge Matthews for about 4 months now. We have not had enough evidence to arrest him yet, but your case might give us exactly what we need. Those forged tax ledgers in the courthouse are physical evidence. If we can get a federal marshal to seize them before Sullivan destroys the documents, we can prove fraud. Rebecca's eyes widened. So you were not just bluffing back there. You really do work for a district judge. Sometimes. I'm primarily a rancher myself, but I hire out for special jobs when the pay is good and the cause is just. Judge Matthews pays well, and I cannot stomach men like Sullivan who use the law as a weapon against honest people. They finished their meal talking through the details of what would need to happen next. Franklin would send a telegram to Judge Matthews that afternoon. The judge would dispatch federal marshals within a few days. In the meantime, Franklin would stay in Reno and make sure Sullivan and his associates did not try anything else against Rebecca or destroy evidence. I should get back to the ranch, Rebecca said as they stepped out of the restaurant into the late afternoon heat. I have evening chores and my ranch hands will worry if I am gone too long. Let me ride out with you, Franklin offered. I'd like to see the property and frankly, I would feel better knowing you got home safely. Sullivan did not strike me as the type to give up easily. Rebecca looked at him for a long moment, and Franklin wondered what she saw. He was 30 years old, weathered by sun and wind, with scars from a life lived hard on the frontier. His clothes were clean but worn, his horse was good but unremarkable, and his savings account held enough to be comfortable but far from wealthy. He was not a catch by conventional standards, just a cowboy who tried to do right when he could. But whatever Rebecca saw in his face must have satisfied her, because she nodded. I would appreciate the company. My horse is stabled at the livery at the end of the street. They collected their horses. Rebecca's a sturdy bay mare named Copper and Franklin's a gray gelding named Smoke, and rode out of Reno heading northeast. The landscape opened up into classic Nevada high desert territory, sagebrush and scrub pine dotting the landscape between rocky outcroppings. The air smelled of dust and juniper, clean and sharp. Rebecca sat her horse like she'd been born in the saddle, her posture relaxed but alert. She pointed out landmarks as they rode, explaining the geography of her land and the surrounding area. The ranch was about an hour's ride from town, positioned in a valley where the creek she'd mentioned provided water, and the surrounding hills offered shelter from the worst winds. When they crested the final ridge and the ranch came into view, Franklin understood immediately why Thomas Grayson had chosen this spot. The valley spread out below them, green in a way that Nevada land rarely achieved. The ranch house was modest but well-maintained, built from local timber with a wide porch that would catch evening breezes. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, all in good repair. Cattle grazed in the distance, healthy-looking stock with good coats. "It's beautiful," Franklin said, and meant it. "It's home," Rebecca replied simply, but he heard the fierce love in her voice. They rode down into the valley, and two men emerged from the barn to greet them. One was older, maybe 50, with a weathered face and bow legs that marked him as a lifelong horseman. The other was younger, perhaps 25, with the solid build of someone who worked hard for his living. "Miss Rebecca," the older man said, relief evident in his tone. "We were starting to worry. Town visit take longer than expected." "There were complications, Henry," Rebecca said, dismounting. "But this is Franklin Quincy. He helped me with a problem at the courthouse. Franklin, this is Henry Wright, my foreman, and that's Samuel Cortez, one of my ranch hands." Both men shook Franklin's hand, their grips testing and firm. Henry's eyes were sharp and assessing, the look of a man who'd worked for Thomas Grayson long enough to feel protective of his daughter. "What kind of complications?" Samuel asked. Rebecca explained what had happened at the courthouse, and both men's expressions darkened. Henry spat into the dust. "I knew something was wrong when those city men showed up asking questions last week. Claimed they were surveying for the county, but they spent most of their time up by the North Creek. Looking for the gold traces," Franklin said, building their case for why they wanted the land. "They cannot take this ranch," Samuel said fiercely. "Miss Rebecca's father built this place from nothing. She's earned the right to keep it." "And she will," Franklin assured him. "I'm going to make sure of that." He stayed for dinner, accepting Rebecca's invitation to join them in the ranch house. The interior was simple but comfortable, decorated with the accumulated touches of 15 years of habitation. Books lined shelves in the parlor, more books than Franklin typically saw in ranch houses. The kitchen was clean and organized, and Rebecca moved through it with practiced efficiency as she prepared a meal for the four of them. Over dinner, Franklin learned more about the ranch operations. Henry had worked for Thomas Grayson since the beginning, helping him build the herd and establish the ranch. Samuel had been hired 3 years ago and proved himself reliable and hardworking. There was one other ranch hand, currently staying in the line shack on the western section of the property watching for cattle drift. "We run about 300 head," Rebecca explained. "Not huge by territory standards, but quality stock. We sell to the mining camps mostly, steady demand for beef with all the silver operations in Virginia City and the surrounding areas." "Good market," Franklin agreed. "Miners need feeding and they pay cash." "Exactly." "The ranch makes a decent profit, enough to pay the hands fair wages and maintain the property with money left over. It's a good life." The way she said it, the contentment mixed with determination, made Franklin's chest tight with an emotion he could not quite name. Rebecca Grayson had built something here, or rather, was fighting to maintain what her father had built. She was not looking for rescue or charity. She just wanted the chance to live her life free from men trying to steal what was rightfully hers. "I should head back to town," Franklin said reluctantly as the evening shadows lengthened. "I need to send that telegram before the office closes." "You could stay," Rebecca said, then blushed slightly. I mean, we have a spare room in the bunkhouse. Save you the ride back in the dark, and you could head to town at first light. Henry and Samuel were suddenly very interested in their plates, and Franklin bit back a smile. That's generous of you, I accept. He sent Samuel into town with the telegram for Judge Matthews, the young man eager to help and capable of making the ride quickly. Henry showed Franklin to the bunkhouse, a clean structure with several beds and basic amenities. Miss Rebecca's a good woman, Henry said as he lit a lantern. Her father raised her right, smart as a whip and tough when she needs to be, but fair and kind to those who deserve it. I can see that, Franklin replied. Those courthouse men try something again, you let me know. I'm too old for much gunplay, but I can still shoot straight when motivated. Hopefully it will not come to that. The federal investigation should scare Sullivan off. Henry nodded slowly. Good. Bloodshed serves nobody. But if it comes down to protecting Miss Rebecca and this ranch, we're ready. After Henry left, Franklin lay on the bunk staring at the ceiling beams and trying to understand what was happening to him. He'd known Rebecca for less than a day, but already she occupied his thoughts in a way that felt significant and dangerous. He'd been in love before, twice, both times ending badly. The first woman had died from cholera, the second had left him for a banker from San Francisco who could offer her city life and security. He'd taught himself to be cautious with his heart, to maintain distance between himself and emotional entanglements. But Rebecca made him want to ignore those hard-learned lessons. She made him want to stay instead of drift, to build something instead of just passing through. Dangerous thoughts for a man who'd spent 6 years moving from job to job, town to town, never settling anywhere long enough to put down roots. He must have slept eventually, because he woke to pre-dawn light filtering through the bunkhouse windows and the sound of horses moving in the corral. Franklin dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Rebecca already up, feeding the horses with practiced efficiency. "Morning," she called out when she saw him. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," he admitted, walking over to join her. "Your bunkhouse beds are more comfortable than most hotel mattresses." Father believed in treating workers well, said a man who was comfortable and fairly paid would work twice as hard as one who was miserable. Smart man. They worked together in companionable silence, feeding the horses and checking water troughs. Samuel had returned late in the night and confirmed the telegram had been sent. Henry emerged from his cabin and started preparing for the day's work, discussing with Rebecca which sections of fence needed mending and how the cattle were distributed across the grazing land. Franklin realized he was seeing the ranch through the eyes of a potential partner rather than a temporary visitor, cataloging the work that needed doing and mentally planning how he'd tackle various projects. It was presumptuous and premature, but his heart was apparently not interested in logic. Over breakfast, Rebecca asked him about his own background. Franklin found himself talking more openly than usual, describing his childhood in Wyoming, his father's small ranch that had been lost to drought and debt, his years working cattle drives up from Texas, his gradual shift into occasional law enforcement work. "So you're a rancher at heart," Rebecca observed. "The other work is just how you finance your real dream." "I suppose that's accurate. I've always wanted my own spread again, something like what my father had before we lost it, but land is expensive and saving takes time." "What kind of ranch do you want?" Franklin considered the question. "Something sustainable, not trying to run thousands of head or become a cattle baron, just enough land to support a decent herd, maybe 300 or 400 head like you have here. Good water, good grass, room to grow but not so big I could not manage it with a few hired hands." "That's exactly what this ranch is," Rebecca said quietly. Their eyes met across the breakfast table, and the air between them felt charged with possibility and unspoken questions. What was happening between them was moving fast, perhaps too fast, but neither of them seemed inclined to slow it down. "I should ride into town," Franklin said, breaking the moment. "Check if there's been any response to my telegram and make sure Sullivan has not done anything foolish overnight." "I'll come with you," Rebecca decided. "I need to check with the bank anyway, make sure there haven't been any attempts to interfere with my accounts." They rode to Reno together, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories and laughter that felt easy and natural. Franklin caught himself watching the way sunlight caught in Rebecca's auburn hair, the way she laughed with her whole body, unrestrained and genuine. She caught him looking more than once, and the small smile that played at her lips suggested she did not mind. In town, they separated to handle their respective errands. Franklin checked with the telegraph office and found a response from Judge Matthews waiting. The message was brief but encouraging. Federal marshals would arrive in Reno within 5 days. Franklin was authorized to act as a deputy marshal until they arrived, with full authority to preserve evidence and prevent further criminal activity. Franklin showed the telegram to the telegraph operator. "I need you to make an official copy of this for your records. If anyone asks, you can confirm that I'm operating under federal authority." "Yes, sir, Deputy Quincy," the operator said, suddenly more deferential. Franklin's next stop was the courthouse. He walked in with the confidence of someone who now had legal backing for his presence. Morris Sullivan was not there, but the deputy clerk from yesterday was, and the man's face went pale when he saw Franklin. "I'm here in my capacity as a temporary federal deputy marshal," Franklin announced. "I need to see the property tax ledgers for the Grayson Ranch and any other properties that have been subject to tax foreclosure proceedings in the past year." "You cannot just demand county records," the clerk stammered. Franklin laid Judge Matthews' telegram on the desk. "Federal authority supersedes county authority in cases of suspected fraud. You can produce the ledgers voluntarily, or I can have the federal marshals seize them when they arrive in 5 days. Your choice, but I should mention that cooperation tends to look better when charges are filed." The clerk's resistance crumbled. "I will get the ledgers, but I want to state for the record that I was following orders from Mr. Sullivan. I did not know the documents were forged." "Tell that to the marshals," Franklin said without sympathy. "Right now, just get me the ledgers." The clerk returned with several large books, laying them on the desk with shaking hands. Franklin opened them and began comparing entries to the list of receipts Rebecca had shown him. The alterations were crude once you knew what to look for. Numbers changed and dates modified with ink that did not quite match the original entries. "I'm taking these into federal custody," Franklin said, gathering the ledgers. "You will provide me with a written receipt confirming that I took possession of them today under federal authority." "But those are official county records. How will we process property taxes without them?" "You will figure something out. Or better yet, you will stop processing property taxes until honest ledgers can be reconstructed. Do you have original receipt copies that have not been altered? Maybe in the archives. I would have to check." "Then check, and when you find them, do not let anyone touch them. The federal marshals will want to examine everything." Franklin left the courthouse with the ledgers under his arm, feeling satisfied. He'd secured the evidence, established his authority, and put Sullivan's operation on notice that their scheme was finished. Now he just needed to make sure no one tried anything desperate before the marshals arrived. He found Rebecca at the bank, looking relieved. "My accounts are fine. No one has tried to access them or freeze them." "That's good. I have the tax ledgers, evidence of the fraud. Sullivan's scheme is finished. They walked out of the bank together and literally ran into Morris Sullivan on the boardwalk. The man's face was flushed with anger, his eyes darting to the ledgers under Franklin's arm. "You have no right to take county property," Sullivan said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "I have every right," Franklin replied calmly. "I'm acting as a federal deputy marshal investigating land fraud. Those ledgers are evidence in a federal crime. You are welcome to file a complaint with Judge Harrison Matthews of the Sacramento District Court. This is not over, Quincy. You are making powerful enemies. I've had powerful enemies before. I'm still here. Are you threatening a federal officer in the execution of his duties? Because that's another crime I can add to the list." Sullivan's jaw worked, but he stepped back. "We will see what happens when your judge realizes you have no real authority here. The federal marshals arriving in 5 days will have plenty of authority. I suggest you use that time to find yourself a good lawyer, Sullivan. You are going to need one." They left Sullivan standing on the boardwalk, his impotent rage almost palpable. Franklin felt Rebecca's hand slip through his arm as they walked toward the livery, a gesture that felt simultaneously casual and intimate. "Is it really over?" she asked quietly. "The fraud scheme is finished. Sullivan might face federal charges. Your ranch is safe. Thanks to you." Franklin stopped walking, turning to face her. They were standing in front of the general store, mid-morning shoppers passing around them, but it felt like they were alone. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I have not been able to stop thinking about you since yesterday. I know it's too fast, and I know I should probably keep my distance until this legal matter is completely resolved, but I would not be honest if I did not admit that I would like to see you again. After the marshals arrive and everything is settled. I would like to court you properly if you're willing." Rebecca's expression softened into something radiant. "Franklin Quincy, I thought you would never ask. I have been thinking about you constantly, too. When you walked into that courthouse yesterday, you were not just saving my ranch. You were answering a prayer I'd been too proud to speak out loud. So that's a yes to courting. That's an enthusiastic yes to courting." Franklin felt like the sun had just come out from behind a cloud. They stood there grinning at each other like fools until a passing wagon forced them to step aside. The next 5 days passed in a strange mixture of tension and joy. Franklin stayed at the ranch, officially to provide security but primarily because neither he nor Rebecca wanted to be apart. They worked together during the days, riding the property line and checking cattle, mending fence and clearing brush from irrigation channels. Henry and Samuel watched this development with knowing smiles but said nothing, letting the relationship unfold naturally. In the evenings, Franklin and Rebecca would sit on the porch after dinner, talking until the stars came out. She told him about her childhood, the adventures and hardships of growing up on a frontier ranch. He shared stories from his years on cattle drives, editing out the worst violence but keeping the humor and human moments that revealed character. They talked about books, discovering a shared love of Shakespeare and Mark Twain. They debated politics and religion, finding common ground on most issues and respectful disagreement on others. They discussed their dreams and fears, hopes and disappointments, building the foundation of real intimacy that went beyond physical attraction. Franklin kissed her for the first time on the 3rd evening, a gentle brush of lips on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains. Rebecca kissed him back with equal tenderness, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could surely feel his heart hammering. "I'm falling in love with you," Franklin whispered against her hair. "I know it's too soon to say that, but it's true." "It's not too soon," Rebecca replied. I'm falling in love with you too. I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for." They took things slowly physically, both aware that they were building something meant to last and neither wanting to rush or cheapen it. But the emotional intimacy grew by the hour, a connection that felt both new and ancient, like coming home to a place you'd never been before. The federal marshals arrived on schedule, two serious men with federal badges and the authority to back them up. They examined the ledgers Franklin had secured, interviewed Rebecca about the courthouse incident, and spent 2 days gathering additional evidence around Reno. They arrested Morris Sullivan and the deputy clerk on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and falsifying official documents. The third man had already fled town, but the marshals assured everyone they would track him down. With the legal threat resolved, Franklin found himself at a crossroads. He could return to his drifting life, taking jobs as they came and moving from place to place. Or he could stay in Reno, stay with Rebecca, and build the life he'd always wanted but never quite believed he deserved. Rebecca made the decision easier. "Stay," she said simply. "Stay and help me run this ranch. Be my partner in every way that matters. I know it's fast and I know you value your independence, but Franklin, I love you. I want to build a life with you." "I love you too," he said. "And I want nothing more than to stay, but I need to do this right. Let me court you properly for a few months. Let us make sure this is real and lasting. Then, if you'll have me, I'll ask you to marry me." "You are already sure," Rebecca said with a knowing smile. "I can see it in your eyes." "Maybe I am, but I want you to be sure too. I want us to have the time to build this right." So Franklin stayed, but he rented a room in town to maintain propriety. He worked at the ranch during the days, learning the operation and proving his worth to Henry and Samuel. He courted Rebecca with the dedication of a man who knew he'd found something precious and rare. They attended church socials together, went on picnics in the hills, and took long rides exploring the territory. Rebecca introduced him to her friends and neighbors, and Franklin gradually became known in Reno not as a drifter or a temporary deputy, but as Rebecca Grayson's intended. Sheriff Robert Grayson returned from tracking horse thieves and gave Franklin a thorough interrogation before grudgingly approving of his niece's choice. "You stopped those courthouse vultures from stealing her inheritance, and you treated her with respect when you could have taken advantage of the situation. That speaks well of your character. But if you hurt her, I will hunt you down and make you regret it." "Fair enough," Franklin replied. "Though you will not need to. Hurting her would hurt me worse than anything you could do." 3 months after that first meeting in the courthouse, Franklin rode out to the ranch with a ring in his pocket. He'd special ordered it from a jeweler in Virginia City, a simple gold band with a small diamond that represented most of his savings. He found Rebecca in the barn, brushing down her horse after the day's work. "Rebecca Grayson," he said, and she turned to face him with a smile that made his heart skip. "I know I said I wanted to wait longer, but I've realized that waiting is just wasting time we could spend building our life together. I love you more than I thought possible to love another person. You are strong and smart and beautiful, and I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" He pulled out the ring, and Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Franklin, I will absolutely marry me." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with a passion that promised everything their future would hold. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Rebecca held up her hand to admire the ring. "It's perfect," she said. "You are perfect. I'm far from perfect, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the husband you deserve." They married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Reno church. Rebecca wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her frame. Franklin wore a new suit purchased specially for the occasion. Sheriff Grayson walked Rebecca down the aisle, tears visible in his eyes as he handed his niece over to Franklin's care. Henry and Samuel stood as witnesses, along with several of Rebecca's friends from town. Judge Matthews traveled from Sacramento to attend, pleased to see the case he'd authorized had ended not just in justice, but in love. The reception was held at the ranch, neighbors and friends gathering to celebrate the union. There was food and music and dancing, the kind of frontier celebration that brought a community together. As the sun set and guests began departing, Franklin and Rebecca stood on the porch of what was now their shared home, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Are you happy?" Franklin asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Rebecca replied. "When those courthouse men were threatening me, I felt so alone and helpless. Then you walked in and everything changed. You gave me back my hope. You gave me a reason to stop drifting. You gave me a home." They went inside together, beginning their married life with the easy intimacy of two people who'd found their perfect match. The physical consummation of their marriage that night was tender and passionate, a celebration of love and commitment that left them both amazed at the depth of connection two people could share. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Franklin threw himself into learning ranching under Henry's patient tutelage, proving to have a natural gift for managing cattle and reading land. When Henry retired 3 years after the wedding, Franklin took over as foreman, running the operation with Rebecca as his full partner. They expanded the herd gradually, buying adjacent land when it became available, and building the ranch into one of the most respected operations in Washoe County. Samuel married a woman from town and brought her to the ranch, building a small cabin on the property where they started their own family. New ranch hands came and went, but the core operation remained stable and profitable. Rebecca and Franklin's first child arrived 2 years after their wedding, a boy they named Thomas after Rebecca's father. The birth was difficult, and Franklin spent hours pacing outside the bedroom while the midwife and doctor worked. When he finally heard his son's first cry, he broke down weeping with relief and joy. Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Sarah, and 3 years after that by another son named James. The ranch house echoed with the sounds of childhood, laughter and arguments, and the constant motion of growing children learning to navigate the world. Franklin proved to be a devoted father, teaching his children to ride and rope, to respect the land and animals, to value honesty and hard work. Rebecca taught them to read and cipher, filling their minds with books and ideas that would serve them well beyond the ranch. On their 10th anniversary, Franklin and Rebecca took a rare trip without the children, leaving them in the care of Samuel's wife and riding up into the mountains for a week alone. They camped under the stars, made love in a meadow full of wildflowers, and talked about everything and nothing the way they had in those early days of courtship. "You ever regret it?" Rebecca asked one evening as they sat by the campfire. "Giving up your independence to settle down here?" Franklin pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Never. Not once. You and the children, the ranch, this life we've built, it's everything I ever wanted and more than I thought I deserved. I was not giving up independence, Rebecca. I was gaining partnership, family, and purpose." "I love you so much," she whispered. "More now than even on our wedding day, if that's possible. It's possible. I feel the same way. Love grows when you tend it properly." Sheriff Robert Grayson remained a constant presence in their lives until his death from a heart attack when Thomas was 7. The loss hit Rebecca hard, but she drew strength from Franklin and their children, finding solace in the family they'd created and the community they'd built. Morris Sullivan served 5 years in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy. Upon release, he left Nevada and was never seen in the territory again. The courthouse corruption he'd represented was cleaned up, replaced by more honest administration that earned back the trust of local property owners. The ranch continued to prosper through the 1880s and into the 1890s. Thomas grew into a serious young man with his grandfather's business sense, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operations. Sarah inherited her mother's sharp intelligence and her father's sense of justice, becoming one of the first female lawyers in Nevada. James remained on the ranch, loving the land and animals with a pure devotion that reminded Franklin of himself at that age. On their 20th anniversary, Franklin and Rebecca sat on the same porch where he'd first kissed her, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Their bodies showed the wear of 2 decades of hard work, hands calloused and faces lined, but their love had only deepened with time. 20 years, Rebecca marveled. It feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. Best 20 years of my life, Franklin said, though I expect the next 20 will be even better. Growing old with you is turning out to be quite an adventure. Just wait until we are too old to work and we can sit here all day telling stories and embarrassing our grandchildren. Rebecca laughed. I look forward to it, to all of it. Every day with you is a gift, Franklin. He took her hand, his thumb rubbing across the worn gold of her wedding band. I walked into that courthouse 20 years ago expecting nothing more than to witness an injustice and maybe prevent it if I could. Instead, I found you, found home, found everything that matters. The best interventions work both ways, Rebecca said softly. You saved my ranch, but I think maybe I saved you too, from a life of drifting, never settling, never finding peace. You absolutely saved me. I was lost before you, just did not realize it. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding vows, and countless nights of building a life together. 3 children slept inside the house, the product of their love and commitment. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and stable, a testament to what 2 people could build when they worked together. In the distance, cattle lowed softly, settling for the night. The creek that had started all the trouble 20 years ago with its gold traces continued to flow, providing water for the ranch without ever being torn apart by mining operations. The land remained intact, passed from Thomas Grayson to his daughter Rebecca, and eventually would pass to their children and grandchildren, a legacy of stewardship and love. Franklin pulled Rebecca closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder with the ease of 20 years of practice. They'd weathered droughts and hard winters, market fluctuations and personal losses, raising children and building a business. Through it all, their love had been the constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. I'll handle this matter now, Rebecca said suddenly, and Franklin looked at her in confusion. What matter? She smiled up at him. Those were the first words I ever heard you say. When you walked into that courthouse and saw me being exploited, you said I'll handle this matter now. It's become my favorite sentence in the English language. Franklin laughed, remembering that moment with perfect clarity. I was trying to sound more confident than I felt, had no idea if those men would back down or if I just made things worse. You made everything better. You handled the matter and you've been handling matters ever since. For me, for our children, for this ranch. You're the man who handles things, Franklin Quincy. We handle things together, he corrected gently. That's what partnership means. True, we make a good team, the best team. They stayed on the porch until the night grew cool enough to drive them inside, where a fire burned in the hearth and their home waited, warm and welcoming. That night, as they lay in bed with Rebecca's head on Franklin's chest and his arms wrapped around her, they talked about the future. About Thomas taking over the ranch eventually, about Sarah's legal practice she hoped to establish, about James possibly buying adjacent land to expand the operation. "We've built something real," Rebecca said sleepily. "Something that will last beyond us." "The greatest legacy," Franklin agreed. "Not just land or cattle, but family and values and love. I hope our children find what we found. This kind of love, this kind of partnership. They will. We are teaching them what to look for, how to recognize real love versus infatuation or convenience." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, then said, "Franklin, thank you." "For what?" "For walking into that courthouse 20 years ago. For being brave and honorable. For choosing me, choosing this life. For every day since then. Thank you for being exactly who you are." Franklin felt emotion tighten his throat. After 20 years of marriage, she could still move him to tears with simple honesty. "Thank you for saying yes. For taking a chance on a drifter cowboy with more idealism than sense. For building this life with me. You are my everything, Rebecca." They fell asleep tangled together, the same way they'd slept for 20 years, finding peace and comfort in each other's presence. Outside, the Nevada night continued its ancient rhythms, the same rhythms that had existed long before them and would continue long after. But for this moment in this house, on this ranch, Franklin and Rebecca Quincy had carved out their own piece of forever. The years continued to roll forward, bringing the turn of the century and all the changes that accompanied it. The Wild West of their youth gradually transformed into something more settled and civilized, though pockets of frontier spirit remained. The ranch adapted with the times, incorporating new techniques and technologies, while maintaining the core values of stewardship and sustainability that Thomas Grayson had established decades earlier. Franklin and Rebecca grew old together, their bodies aging but their minds and hearts remaining sharp and engaged. They became fixtures in Reno society, respected for their business acumen, their integrity, and their enduring love story that had become something of a local legend. Young couples would sometimes visit the ranch seeking advice, wanting to know the secret to a marriage that had lasted so long and remained so obviously happy. "There is no secret," Rebecca would tell them. "Just commitment and choice. We choose each other every day. We choose kindness over being right. We choose to communicate instead of assume. We choose to laugh together instead of crying alone. And we remember why we fell in love in the first place," Franklin would add. "When things get hard, and they will get hard, you have to remember the person you fell in love with is still in there, still worth fighting for." On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a huge celebration. Thomas and his wife brought their 4 children. Sarah came from Carson City, where she'd established her legal practice, bringing her husband and twin daughters. James and his wife brought their 3 children from the adjacent property they'd purchased 5 years earlier. The family filled the ranch house to bursting. Multiple generations gathered to celebrate the love that had started everything. Franklin looked around the dinner table that night, seeing his legacy reflected in the faces of his children and grandchildren, and felt a contentment so profound it was almost overwhelming. "What are you thinking?" Rebecca asked, noticing his expression. "That I'm the luckiest man who ever lived," he replied honestly. "That every good thing in my life traces back to the day I walked into a courthouse and saw a brave woman fighting for what was hers. And I'm thinking that the best decision I ever made was accepting help from a cowboy who said he'd handle the matter, Rebecca replied, taking his hand. "We've had a good life, Franklin. The best life." They lived another 10 years past that anniversary, watching their grandchildren grow and welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. The ranch remained in the family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation that Thomas Grayson had built and Franklin and Rebecca had strengthened. Franklin passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 75, Rebecca beside him as she'd been for 45 years of marriage. His last words were, "I love you," spoken to the woman who'd been his partner, his love, his home. Rebecca lived another 3 years, remaining on the ranch surrounded by family. She spent her final years writing down the family stories, preserving the history for future generations. She wrote about her father's original homestead, about the courthouse confrontation that had changed her life, about 45 years of marriage to a man who'd been everything she'd never known to hope for. On a warm spring morning, Rebecca passed away sitting on the porch she'd shared with Franklin for so many evenings, her journal open on her lap. The last entry reads simply, "Today I'll see my Franklin again. What a reunion it will be." They were buried side by side in the small cemetery overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple headstones that read Franklin Quincy, 1848–1923, beloved husband and father, and Rebecca Grayson Quincy, 1856–1926, beloved wife and mother. Between the headstones, their children placed a larger stone with an inscription that summarized their love story. "He said, 'I'll handle this matter now,' and he spent a lifetime keeping that promise." The ranch continued through the generations, the Quincy family maintaining the legacy of stewardship and integrity that Franklin and Rebecca had embodied. The story of how they'd met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of how love can bloom even in the hardest circumstances, how one moment of bravery can change the course of multiple lives. The courthouse where it all began was eventually torn down and replaced with a more modern structure, but a plaque was placed on the site commemorating the land fraud cases of 1878 and the federal investigation that had cleaned up corruption in Washoe County. Franklin and Rebecca's names were mentioned on that plaque, their story preserved as part of the region's history. Years turned into decades, and the Wild West of Franklin and Rebecca's youth became the subject of history books and romantic nostalgia. But in the Quincy family, it remained personal and immediate, a real love story about real people who'd faced real challenges and built something lasting through courage, commitment, and love. The creek still flows through the northern section of what is now known as the Quincy Ranch, its water sustaining cattle and wildlife as it has for over a century. The gold traces that once attracted Morris Sullivan's fraudulent schemes were never mined, the family choosing to honor Thomas and Franklin's belief that some things matter more than profit. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sunset paints the mountains in colors too beautiful for words, ranch workers swear they can see two figures sitting on the old porch, hand in hand, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Whether it's memory or something more, the vision serves as a reminder that true love doesn't end with death. It echoes through generations, inspiring and guiding those who come after to build their own stories of courage and connection. Franklin and Rebecca's love story began with exploitation and injustice, with a brave woman fighting for her inheritance and a cowboy who couldn't walk away from wrong. It grew through shared work and values, through laughter and challenge, through the daily choice to honor and cherish each other. It flourished in partnership and parenthood, in building something larger than themselves. And it ended, as all earthly stories must, with death and grief, but also with legacy and completion. They had lived fully, loved completely, and left behind not just property and possessions, but a template for how to build a life that matters. In a time and place where survival often trumped sentiment, Franklin and Rebecca had proved that love could be both practical and passionate, that romance and ranching could coexist, that two people committed to each other could weather any storm. Their story became the foundation upon which their descendants built their own lives, a reminder that the best legacies are not measured in acres or dollars, but in love shared and values passed forward. And every time a new generation of the Quincy family gathers at the ranch, someone invariably tells the story of how it all began, of a cowboy who walked into a courthouse and said 5 words that changed everything. "I'll handle this matter now." Those 5 words became a family motto, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step forward when others would step back, to act when action is needed, to stand up for justice, even when it's inconvenient or dangerous. Franklin had embodied those words throughout his life, handling matters big and small with integrity and courage. And Rebecca had been his perfect partner, handling her own matters while supporting his, the two of them creating a partnership that made them both stronger. In the end, their love story was not remarkable because it was unusual, but because it was authentic. They were real people who'd faced real challenges and chosen love, commitment, and partnership over easier paths. They'd built a life together one day at a time, one decision at a time, one choice to honor their vows at a time. And in doing so, they'd created something that lasted far beyond their mortal years, a legacy of love that continued to inspire and guide long after they were gone. The sun sets over the Quincy ranch every evening, painting the sky in the same colors Franklin and Rebecca watched for 45 years. The cattle settle for the night, with the same soft lowing that accompanied their courtship. The creek flows with the same gentle persistence that has sustained the land for generations. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, the love story of Franklin and Rebecca Quincy continues, eternal and unchanging, a testament to what two people can build when they choose each other and commit to handling life's matters together.